The galaxy had never seen such a display of cruelty before. 60,000 human men, women, and even children stood in neat rows across the execution fields of the planet Jorvik 5, their hands bound behind their backs, their faces covered with black hoods. Overhead, enormous drones hovered silently, their lenses transmitting every angle of the impending massacre across the interstellar networks. The Galactic Council, the governing body of the known universe, had decreed that this execution would serve as a warning to all who dared question its authority. The charges were simple: treason, sedition, conspiracy against the Council. The punishment? Death by hanging. For General Elias Reigns, watching from the safety of a hidden warship deep in neutral space, the moment felt surreal. His fists were clenched so tightly that his nails cut into his palms, but he barely felt the pain. His mind was frozen, struggling to process the horror unfolding before him. These were not terrorists, nor were they criminals. They were innocent civilians, workers, teachers, scientists, soldiers, rounded up and condemned as scapegoats for a crime they had never committed. A massive screen hovered above the execution field, displaying the image of High Chancellor Orlan Vex, the reptilian dictator of the Galactic Council. His cold, slitted eyes scanned the prisoners as he addressed the entire galaxy. "The Council has spoken," Vex announced, his deep voice carrying a tone of absolute finality. "These humans, conspirators of the terrorist attack on our great capital, have been found guilty in accordance with galactic law. They sought to destabilize our peaceful rule. They sought war, and for that, they must face the consequences." Lies. Every word was a lie. Elias knew the truth. The so-called terrorist attack had been nothing more than a fabrication, a convenient excuse to exterminate the growing human presence in the galaxy. Ever since humanity had begun expanding beyond their homeworlds, they had been seen as a threat by the Council. Their independence, their refusal to submit completely, had made them dangerous in the eyes of the ruling elite. And now, they were being punished for it. The countdown began. The massive execution scaffolds, stretching for miles across the planet, were equipped with precision gravity harnesses. The moment the counter reached zero, the prisoners would be dropped simultaneously, their necks snapping in perfect synchronization. A cold, calculated display of power. Elias turned to his communications officer. "Cut the feed." "We can't. Sir, the Council is broadcasting on every major network. It's unavoidable." The numbers flashed across the screen. 3. Elias's vision blurred with rage. 2. He slammed his fist against the table. "We should be doing something. We should be..." 1. The world went silent. Then, in an instant, 60,000 bodies dropped, their necks snapping all at once. The sound of it, if there had been any, was drowned out by the chilling silence of space. The cameras zoomed in, ensuring that every corner of the galaxy could witness humanity's humiliation. Some prisoners had struggled, others had stood, defiant until the end. But in the end it had not mattered. Elias had seen death before. He had fought in wars, had watched soldiers die under his command. But this was different. This was genocide. His second-in-command, Commander Vela Corrin, a veteran of countless battles, looked just as shaken. "General," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What do we do now?" Elias exhaled sharply. His mind was a storm, his blood boiling with an anger he could barely contain. This was not just an attack on humanity, it was a statement, a declaration, that no one, no species could challenge the Council's rule and live. And the worst part? The galaxy would move on. The news would cover the execution for a few cycles. Protests would spark across human colonies. But in the end, the Council would remain in power, untouched, untouchable, unless someone did something. Elias straightened, his expression hardening into something cold, something sharp. He turned to his officers, his voice steady and firm. "Get me a direct line to the Galactic Council." Vela's eyes widened. "Sir, that's suicide. If they even hear your voice..." "I don't care," Elias snapped. "Get me that connection now." The bridge crew hesitated for only a moment before scrambling to comply. Within seconds, a direct transmission request was sent to the Council's headquarters. It was a long shot. They could easily ignore it, or worse, trace the signal and... Send an execution squad after him, but Elias didn't care. Then, against all expectations, the screen flickered, and the cold reptilian visage of Chancellor Orlan Vex appeared. The smug expression on his face made Elias want to put a bullet through the screen. "Ah?" Vex said, his forked tongue flicking out briefly. "General Elias Reigns, I was wondering when you would make your appearance." Elias kept his voice level, but his entire body was tense. "You slaughtered 60,000 of my people." Vex tilted his head, as if considering the statement. "Yes," he said simply. "Justice has been served." "Justice?" Elias spat. "You murdered innocents. You orchestrated this entire charade to make humanity a scapegoat, to justify your crimes." The Chancellor leaned forward slightly. "Careful, General. Words like that can have consequences." Elias clenched his jaw. "I demand a trial. A real trial. I want the Council to be held accountable for this atrocity. If you refuse..." He took a step closer to the screen. "Then I swear by every star in this cursed galaxy, humanity will have its justice, one way or another." For the first time, Vex let out a low, amused hiss. "Justice? What a quaint concept. Tell me, General, how do you propose to enforce this? Justice? With your scattered fleets? Your colonies already under my watchful eye? Humanity is broken, it is over. Accept your fate, and perhaps I will be merciful when the time comes." Elias felt his entire body tremble, not with fear, but with barely restrained fury. He leaned in closer, staring directly into the Chancellor's soulless eyes. "You should have killed me when you had the chance," he said, his voice deadly quiet. Vex's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. Elias cut the transmission. The bridge was silent. Every officer stared at him, waiting for orders, for direction. He turned to them, his expression carved from stone. "We're not waiting for permission anymore," he said. "If the Council wants to rule through fear, then they will learn what it means to fear us." Commander Vela swallowed. "Sir, are you declaring war?" Elias stared at the screen, at the frozen image of the executed thousands. He already knew the answer. "No," he said. "I'm demanding justice. If they refuse..." His fists tightened. "Then we burn their empire to the ground." The war for humanity's survival had just begun. The transmission had barely ended when the weight of what Elias had done settled upon him. Declaring open defiance against the Galactic Council was not something done lightly. Every empire, every species that had attempted to resist the Council's will had been systematically crushed, erased from history as if they had never existed. And now Elias had put humanity directly in their crosshairs. The bridge of his warship, the Iron Vow, was silent, its crew still absorbing the full gravity of their situation. Commander Vela Corrin was the first to speak. "Sir, what's the plan?" Elias exhaled slowly, forcing his rage into something colder, something useful. "We gather the truth. We make sure the galaxy knows that the Council's justice is nothing more than mass murder." "But how?" one of the officers asked. "The Council controls the entire information network. They decide what the people see." Elias turned to the communications officer. "Patch me through to the underground channels, the resistance, rogue traders, black market networks, anyone who still values truth over propaganda." The officer hesitated before nodding. Within minutes, encrypted messages were being sent across the void, reaching hidden rebel groups, exiled human colonies, and disillusioned members of the Council's own military. Elias had no illusions. This wasn't just about proving the Council's crimes. This was war. And wars were won with allies, with strategy, with patience. As he stared at the execution footage looping on a side monitor, his fists tightened. Humanity would not die in silence, the sparks of rebellion. The response came faster than expected. A few days after Elias's message was sent, a covert transmission arrived from the human colonies on Vega Prime, one of the few independent worlds that had resisted full annexation by the Council. Governor Aidan Holt, a former Earth Federation admiral, appeared on the Iron Vow's holoscreen. His silver hair and battle-scarred face carried the weight of years of conflict. "Oh, you've just made yourself the most wanted man in the galaxy, Elias," Holt said grimly. I don't care, Elias replied. 60,000 of our people are dead. The Council thinks they can erase us. I won't let that happen. Holt studied him for a moment. Then he sighed. You're not alone in this, you should know that. After the executions, protests erupted on every human colony. The Council's crackdown has only made them angrier. I've had defectors from the Galactic Fleet reach out, officers who are disgusted by what happened. Defectors? Elias leaned forward. This was more than he had hoped for. How many? Not enough to take on the Council, Holt admitted, but enough to make a difference. There's also support from some alien factions, the Yalari, Trade Guild, the Oris Enclave. They've suffered under the Council's rule too, and they see an opportunity in this. Elias frowned. They're not joining out of morality. They just want to weaken the Council. Holt shrugged. Does it matter? We need ships, weapons, resources. They have them. Elias considered this. Trusting opportunists was dangerous, but then again, so was war. He had no choice. Arrange a meeting. I want to speak to their representatives myself. Holt nodded. There's one more thing. We intercepted some data from a Council military outpost near the Gorgon Nebula. It contains records, classified, orders, secret transmissions, and it proves beyond a doubt that the terrorist attack was a staged event. The Council orchestrated it themselves. Elias's breath caught. You have proof? Holt's expression was grim. Enough to burn the entire Council's reputation to the ground. If we can get this information out, the galaxy will know the truth. Elias clenched his fists. Then we need to move fast, because the moment the Council realizes we have that data, they'll come for us, Holt finished. And they did. Assassins in the dark. The first attack came just 2 nights later. Elias had barely fallen into a restless sleep in his quarters when the alarms blared. His eyes snapped open, instinct kicking in before his mind had fully woken. General Rains to the bridge, security breach in Sector C-12, the ship's AI announced. Elias was already moving, grabbing his sidearm and storming out of his quarters. He sprinted down the corridors, meeting Commander Vela along the way. What happened? He demanded. Unknown hostiles infiltrated the ship, she reported, panting slightly. They bypassed our security like it was nothing. At least 5 of them. They're headed straight for you. Assassins. The Council wasn't wasting time. By the time they reached the hallway near Elias's quarters, gunfire was already ringing. Through the air. Security officers were exchanging shots with black-clad figures wielding plasma blades, silent, deadly killers who moved like shadows. Elias didn't hesitate. He raised his weapon and fired. One of the assassins jerked as a bullet, tore through their skull, but the others barely flinched. They were fast, inhumanly fast. Before Elias could fire again, one of them lunged at him, blade slicing through the air. He barely dodged in time, the blade cutting a thin line across his arm. Pain flared, but Elias gritted his teeth and swung his gun like a club, smashing the assassin's face. Vela took down another with a well-placed shot, and the security team finally gained the upper hand, overwhelming the remaining attackers. As the last assassin fell, silence filled the hallway. Elias wiped the blood from his arm. That was too close. Vela crouched beside one of the bodies, pulling down the attacker's mask. The face beneath was human. Elias's stomach twisted. The Council is using humans as their assassins now. Vela's expression darkened. No, look at the eyes. Elias leaned in and felt a chill run down his spine. The assassin's pupils were milky white, the veins around them unnaturally dark. He had seen this before. Council experiments, genetic augmentation, mind control. These weren't just assassins, they were puppets. We need to move faster, Elias muttered. Vela nodded. Agreed. The Council won't stop until we're all dead. The war begins. The meeting with the rebel factions took place in the depths of a derelict space station, hidden within the remnants of a shattered moon. Representatives from the Yalari Trade Guild, the Oris Enclave, and the scattered remnants of humanity gathered around a hollow table, their faces illuminated by the flickering light. Elias stood at the head of the table, his gaze sweeping across the assembled leaders. You've all seen what the Council is capable of. They won't stop at humanity. They will tighten their grip until no species has any freedom left. A Yalari merchant, her green-scaled hands resting on the table, flicked her golden eyes toward him. "And what do you propose, General? Open war?" Elias nodded. "Yes." Murmurs spread through the room, some in agreement, others in fear. "We have proof of their crimes," Elias continued. "If we broadcast it across the galaxy, we can turn the people against them, and with your fleets, your resources, we can strike before they have a chance to retaliate." An Oris warlord, his face half covered in cybernetic plating, leaned forward. "You're asking us to gamble everything," Elias met his gaze. "I'm asking you to fight, because if we don't, the Council will come for us all, and by then it'll be too late." Silence. Then Holt stepped forward. "I stand with Elias, and so does Vega Prime." One by one the others gave their oaths. The rebellion had begun, and the Council had no idea what was coming. The first shots of the war were fired in the dead of space. A Galactic Council fleet, stationed at Outpost Zeta 49, had no warning before the human resistance launched their first strike. A dozen stealth ships, modified for deep space infiltration, emerged from the darkness and unleashed a precise, merciless assault. Plasma torpedoes tore through the Council's primary warships before they could raise their shields. Explosions illuminated the void, sending debris spiraling into the abyss. By the time the Council's defense systems activated, half their fleet was already reduced to wreckage. On the bridge of the Iron Vow, General Elias Rains stood with arms crossed, watching as his forces executed the attack with brutal efficiency. Commander Vela Corrin relayed real-time updates as resistance fighters swarmed the outpost, securing key locations. "The enemy is retreating, sir," Vela reported, her voice edged with determination. "We've taken the outpost. No major losses. On our side." Elias nodded but didn't smile. Victory here was only the beginning. "Broadcast the message," he ordered. "Let the galaxy know. The war has begun." The flames spread within days. News of the attack on Outpost Zeta 49 spread across the galaxy. The Council tried to suppress it, labeling it as a terrorist assault by extremist remnants, but the truth slipped through the cracks, the Kais. Resistance had been preparing for this moment. Every colony, every faction that had suffered under the Council's rule received the message, "Humanity fights back." Join us, and they did. On the industrial planet of Archon III, an uprising of human workers seized control of an entire shipyard, repurposing it into a resistance base. On the Oris homeworld, warriors who had long despised the Council pledged their allegiance to Elias's cause, bringing advanced weapons and warships. Even rogue elements within the Council's own fleet, officers disgusted by the executions, began defecting. For the first time in centuries, the Council was losing control. High Chancellor Orlan Vex watched the situation unfold with growing fury. "This is unacceptable," he hissed, his claws digging into the armrest of his throne. The other Council members, representatives from the various ruling species, shifted uneasily under his glare. "General Rains must be eliminated," a councillor suggested. "Without him, the rebellion will collapse." Vex's slitted eyes narrowed. "We have underestimated the humans before. That mistake will not be repeated." He turned to a looming figure standing in the shadows of the chamber, a warlord clad in black armor, his face hidden behind a mask. "Admiral Kael, deploy the execution fleet. Burn their worlds. Let them understand what it means to defy us, the Pai." Masked Admiral bowed. "As you command." The Council's counterattack had begun, the Battle of Vega Prime. The war escalated faster than anyone had anticipated. Within weeks, the Council launched a devastating assault on Vega Prime, the heart of the Resistance's operations. The attack came without warning. Dozens of dreadnoughts, flanked by swarms of fighters, emerged from hyperspace and rained fire upon the planet. The sky turned red as orbital bombardments tore through the cityscape. Towers crumbled, streets were turned to molten slag, and millions of lives were lost in an instant. But the Resistance was ready. Elias had anticipated the attack and prepared a trap. As the Council's fleet descended, hidden planetary defenses activated. Massive railguns, and ion cannons concealed beneath the city's ruins unleashed a withering barrage. Resistance warships, hidden behind the planet's moon, emerged and struck the Council's fleet from behind. Chaos erupted in orbit. Elias led the charge personally, piloting his flagship into the heart of the battle. Enemy ships exploded around him, as the Resistance fought with the desperation of those who had nothing left to lose. But the Council had brought their best. Admiral Kael's dreadnought, the Judgment, cut through the battlefield like a predator among prey. Its weapons decimated Resistance ships with terrifying precision. One by one, Elias's allies fell. Then, Kael's forces landed on the planet itself. The battle was no longer just in space. It was on the ground, in the streets, in the homes of Vega Prime's citizens. Elias and his soldiers fought fiercely, but they were outnumbered. "We can't hold them," Vela shouted, firing her rifle as she crouched behind a burning vehicle. "They're overwhelming us." Elias gritted his teeth. He knew she was right. If they stayed, Vega Prime would be their grave. "Order an evacuation," he commanded. "Get as many people off the planet as possible." Vela hesitated. "Sir, if we leave, we lose Vega Prime." "I know," Elias said, his voice heavy. "But we live to fight another day." The Resistance retreated. Vega Prime burned. The Council had won the battle, but not the war, a war of shadows. The fall of Vega Prime was a devastating loss, but it was not the end. Elias and his forces regrouped in the Outer Rim, where they adapted their strategy. No longer could they afford direct engagements with the Council's overwhelming military strength. Instead, they waged war in the shadows. They struck supply lines, hijacked Council convoys, sabotaged shipyards. Every time the Council thought they had crushed the Resistance, another attack would prove them wrong. They became ghosts, striking from the darkness and vanishing before retaliation could come. The war was no longer just about survival. It was about vengeance. Elias knew he had changed. He had always been a soldier, but now he was something else. A leader of rebels, a symbol of defiance. But with every battle, with every loss, he felt himself slipping further into the abyss. One night, Vela confronted him. "You're pushing too hard," she said. "We've been fighting non-stop. We need to regroup." Elias shook his head. "We don't have time. Every moment we wait, the Council tightens its grip." Vela sighed. "And what happens when we win? What kind of leader will you be then?" Elias didn't answer, because deep down he wasn't sure. The final gambit. The war could not last forever. Elias knew that to truly win, they had to strike at the heart of the beast. The Galactic Council's stronghold, the Citadel, was the most heavily defended location in the galaxy. But if they could take it, if they could force the Council to answer for their crimes in front of the entire galaxy, the war would end. It was an impossible mission. But Elias had never been one for playing it safe. Gathering every last ally, every last ship, he made his decision. The Resistance would storm the Citadel. One way or another, the war would end. Victory or death. There was no turning back now. The Citadel stood at the heart of the Galactic Council's dominion, a fortress of steel and glass, suspended above a dying world. It was the center of power, where laws were written, where rulers decided the fate of entire species with a mere flick of their fingers. And now it was the target of Elias Raines's final assault. The Resistance had gathered every last ship, every last fighter, for one final, desperate gamble. The odds were impossible, but Elias had no intention of retreating. This was where the war would end, either in victory or in their annihilation. As the fleet emerged from hyperspace, alarms blared across the Citadel's defenses. The Council had been expecting an attack, but not this. Thousands of ships, human, Oris, Yalari, and countless defectors from the Council's own military, descended upon the stronghold like a vengeful storm. Elias stood on the bridge of the Iron Vow, his eyes locked onto the battlefield before him. His voice was steady as he issued the order. "All ships, engage at will, no mercy. The battle for the Citadel." The void erupted into chaos. The Council's fleet, vast and unyielding, met the Resistance head-on. The space around the Citadel became a burning graveyard of shattered vessels and debris. Fighters weaved through the wreckage, exchanging fire in deadly dances of death. Capital ships clashed with cataclysmic force, unleashing torrents of plasma and kinetic rounds. On the ground, resistance strike teams breached the citadel's outer defenses, fighting their way through corridors choked with enemy soldiers. The Council's elite guards, armed with the most advanced weapons in existence, made every inch a blood-soaked struggle. Elias led the charge personally. Alongside Vela Corrin and his most trusted soldiers, he stormed the Council's inner sanctum, cutting through the enemy with ruthless efficiency. The halls of power, once pristine and untouched, became battlegrounds of fire and blood. As they reached the inner chamber, an explosion rocked the entire citadel. The Iron Vow had rammed one of the primary defense towers, crippling the station's weapons. But the battle was far from over. The final confrontation, Elias and his team burst into the Grand Hall, the very heart of the Galactic Council. The room was massive, adorned with towering columns and holographic banners displaying the Council's insignia. At the far end, seated, upon his throne of power, was High Chancellor Orlan Vex. He did not flee, he did not beg. Instead, he watched Elias approach, his reptilian face unreadable. Around him, his personal guards raised their weapons. Elias raised his rifle. Vex exhaled, then stood. "Do you think this will change anything, General?" His voice was calm, almost amused. "Kill me, and another will take my place. This is the way of power." Elias stepped forward. 60,000 of my people died in your execution chambers." Vex tilted his head. "Yes, and look what it created. A monster." For a moment, there was silence. Elias felt the weight of everything. He had done every sacrifice, every battle. Had he become a monster? Was he any different from the Council now? Then he remembered. The faces of the dead, the cries of the oppressed. No, he was not a monster. He was justice. With a single shot, he ended Orlan Vex's reign. The aftermath. The citadel fell. The Council's forces, leaderless and in disarray, crumbled beneath the weight of the Resistance's final push. Across the galaxy, oppressed worlds rose in rebellion. The chains of tyranny were shattered. The war was over, but peace was fragile. As Elias stood among the ruins of the Council's throne room, Vela approached him. "It's done," she said quietly. "We won." Elias looked out over the burning horizon. "Did we?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" Elias exhaled. "The Council is gone, but power never disappears, it just shifts. Who rules now? Who decides what justice looks like?" Vela hesitated. "We do." Elias met her gaze. "Then we have to be better than them." And so, as the ashes of war settled, humanity and its allies stood on the edge of a new era. A future forged in fire, built on the ruins of the old world. The war was over, but the fight for a just galaxy had only just begun.